At -96 degrees Fahrenheit, the snow doesn't just freeze your body. It convinces you to stop fighting. Emily Carter kept hearing those words in her head as she dragged herself across the endless white wilderness of northern Alaska, with snow hammering against her face hard enough to feel like broken glass, and every breath cutting through her lungs like ice water, because 6 hours earlier, she had been inside a heated research truck laughing at a stupid joke from her coworker while checking weather equipment near the Arctic Circle. But then the storm arrived faster than anyone predicted, and within minutes the world disappeared into a spinning wall of white, and now Emily was completely alone with no road, no signal, and no idea if she was even walking in the right direction anymore. The GPS clipped to her jacket had frozen solid almost an hour ago, and the battery inside her emergency radio died right after sunset, leaving her with nothing except the sound of brutal wind screaming across the frozen land like something alive. She pulled her hood tighter around her blonde hair, but it barely mattered because frost had already formed along her eyelashes, and every time she blinked, tiny crystals cracked against her skin. She tried flexing her fingers inside her gloves, but the numbness spreading through her hands terrified her more than the storm itself, because she remembered exactly what hypothermia did to people. First came the shaking, then confusion, then the dangerous warmth that tricked victims into lying down forever. Emily looked at the dark horizon, but there was nothing there. No lights, no rescue teams, no movement, just snow swirling through endless darkness. She checked the small digital thermometer strapped to her backpack and felt her stomach sink. -96 degrees Fahrenheit. She whispered the number out loud, as if hearing it might somehow make it less real, but instead her voice vanished instantly into the storm. The cold had become something physical, now something heavy pressing against her chest, slowing every movement, forcing her legs to feel like concrete. She stumbled over buried ice and crashed into the snow with a sharp gasp. For a second she stayed there, too exhausted to move, while freezing wind buried the side of her body in powder, and somewhere deep inside her mind a dangerous thought appeared: just rest for 1 minute, that's all. But then another voice pushed through the exhaustion, her mother's voice, calm and firm from years ago during a winter camping trip in Colorado. "If you stop moving in the snow, Emily, you don't go to sleep, you disappear." Emily squeezed her eyes shut and forced herself back onto her feet, even though her knees shook violently. She kept walking step after step, blindly pushing through the storm, while memories flashed through her mind: warm kitchen lights, hot coffee, her father grilling burgers during the 4th of July, her little sister teasing her for always choosing adventure over safety. Those memories felt impossibly far away now, like scenes from someone else's life. Suddenly the wind shifted, and Emily froze, because through the blizzard she heard something else. Not the storm, not ice-cracking footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps somewhere behind her. At first she thought it was another hallucination caused by the cold, but then she heard it again, closer this time. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Emily's breathing became shallow as panic crawled into her chest, because out here predators sometimes followed storms, and she had no weapon, no flare, and barely enough strength left to stand. She slowly turned around, trying to see through the snow, and that was when she noticed shapes moving in the distance, massive dark figures emerging silently from the white darkness one by one, and as the storm howled louder around her, dozens of glowing eyes suddenly appeared in the snow. Emily could barely breathe as the dark shapes moved slowly through the storm toward her, and for one terrifying second, she was certain she was about to die alone in the Arctic, surrounded by wild animals, because out here nature did not care whether you survived or disappeared forever. The figures became clearer through the swirling snow, and Emily realized they were reindeer, at least 20 of them, maybe more, their thick winter coats covered in frost, while clouds of warm breath rolled from their nostrils into the freezing air. The herd stopped about 30 feet away and stared at her in complete silence. Their black eyes reflected the pale light of the storm, almost glowing against the darkness. Emily tried to back away, but her legs immediately buckled beneath her, and pain shot through her knees as she crashed into the snow again. She forced herself onto her elbows, breathing hard, while her vision blurred around the edges. She had spent years studying Arctic weather patterns, but nothing in her training prepared her for the feeling of being hunted by the cold itself. Every second outside felt heavier than the last, as if the storm was slowly draining the life out of her body. She reached for the emergency flare attached to her backpack, hoping the bright light might scare the animals away, but her fingers were too numb to grip it properly. The flare slipped from her frozen hand and disappeared beneath the snow. Emily let out a weak, frustrated sound as panic rose in her chest because she knew what came next: confusion, exhaustion, then unconsciousness. She had read enough survival reports to recognize the signs, and now they were happening to her. Her thoughts slowed, her movements became clumsy, and worst of all, she could feel warmth spreading through her body. Despite the deadly temperature, she knew enough to understand how dangerous that feeling really was. Hypothermia was beginning to trick her brain into believing she was safe. The largest reindeer stepped forward through the storm, massive antlers cutting through the falling snow like branches from an ancient tree. Emily held her breath, waiting for the animal to charge or run away. Instead, it simply stood there staring at her, while wind slammed against its thick coat. Without moving, the rest of the herd remained behind it, perfectly still, almost like they were waiting for something. Emily tried standing one more time, but her body no longer obeyed properly. Her legs trembled violently, and she collapsed back into the snow, breathing faster now because fear was starting to overwhelm her. She looked up at the endless white sky and suddenly remembered the voicemail her mother had left 2 days earlier, reminding her to come home for Christmas. Emily had been too busy preparing for the research trip to call back, and now guilt hit her harder than the cold, because deep down she wondered if her family would ever even find her if the storm buried her completely. Rescuers might not recover her until spring. Another gust of freezing wind blasted across the open ice field, and Emily curled inward, trying desperately to conserve warmth, but it felt useless. Snow gathered across her jacket and hood while her eyelashes froze together. Every time she blinked, she whispered to herself, "Stay awake. Stay moving, stay alive," but the words sounded weaker each time. Then something strange happened. The lead reindeer suddenly turned sideways, placing its body directly between Emily and the brutal wind behind it. Another reindeer moved closer, then another, and another, until the entire herd slowly surrounded her in a loose circle. Emily stared in confusion, too exhausted to understand what she was seeing. The animals lowered their heads against the storm while warm clouds of breath drifted around her face. For the first time in hours, the wind hitting her body became weaker, blocked by the thick wall of fur surrounding her. Emily felt tears forming in her eyes, instantly freezing against her skin, because somewhere deep inside, she realized these animals were not trapping her, they were shielding her. And as the storm continued roaring across the frozen wilderness, the circle around her slowly tightened. The circle closed tighter around Emily until she could barely see the storm beyond the bodies of the reindeer. And for the first time since getting lost, she noticed something almost impossible. The air inside the herd felt warmer, not warm enough to be comfortable, but enough to stop the brutal wind from stealing every ounce of heat from her skin. She sat trembling in the snow, while thick clouds of breath drifted around her face and melted tiny crystals along her frozen eyelashes. One of the younger reindeer carefully stepped closer, lowering its head near her shoulder. Emily flinched at first, but the animal only stared at her quietly before settling into the snow beside her, its thick fur brushing against her jacket. The contact startled her, because after hours in deadly cold, even that small amount of warmth felt overwhelming. Emily closed her eyes for a second, trying not to cry, but exhaustion was crushing her now. Her muscles ached from fighting the storm, and every breath sounded weaker than the last. Somewhere far above the clouds, the sky had gone completely dark. Night in the Arctic felt endless, like the entire world had vanished beyond the blizzard. She tried counting the animals around her, but her thoughts kept drifting in and out as hypothermia tightened its grip on her body. She knew she should stay awake. She knew falling asleep could kill her, but her eyelids felt unbearably heavy. Suddenly, the lead reindeer let out a deep, low sound, and the rest of the herd shifted slightly, tightening the circle again until almost no wind reached her. Emily stared at them in disbelief. These animals should have run from humans, not protected one, especially during a storm this dangerous. She slowly removed one glove and immediately regretted it, as icy pain stabbed through her fingers, but she needed to know if this was real. With shaking hands, she reached toward the nearest reindeer and touched its thick winter fur. It was warm, unbelievably warm. The animal did not move away. Emily swallowed hard, feeling tears build again, because in that terrifying frozen wilderness, surrounded by darkness and death, the only living things keeping her alive were creatures she had never expected to trust. Another violent gust slammed into the outside of the herd, but inside the circle the sound became softer, muted. By layers of fur and bodies, Emily leaned forward slightly, letting herself rest against the side of the young reindeer beside her. Its steady breathing calmed her racing heart for a moment. She almost forgot where she was, then her mind flashed back to the rescue team. She wondered if anyone was still searching for her, or if the storm had forced them to give up. She imagined her co-workers staring helplessly at radar screens while the weather grew worse by the hour, and somewhere back home in Denver, her mother probably had no idea her daughter was lying in the middle of the Arctic, trying not to freeze to death. Emily reached into her coat pocket with stiff, trembling fingers and pulled out the small silver necklace her father had given her before college, a tiny compass charm scratched from years of where she stared at it through blurry vision, remembering his words when she first moved away from home: no matter how lost you get, keep moving forward, and eventually you will find your way. Emily squeezed the necklace tightly as warmth from the animals slowly returned, painful feeling to her hands and feet, but along with that warmth came exhaustion deeper than anything she had ever felt before. Her head drooped lower and lower while the storm outside continued roaring like an endless ocean of ice. Suddenly, a sharp, buzzing noise broke through the wind. Emily lifted her head weakly. At first she thought she imagined it, but then she heard it again, faint mechanical vibrations somewhere above the storm. Her heart jumped. Rescue drone. She tried calling for help, but her throat was too dry and cold to make more than a weak whisper. Panic surged through her chest, because if the drone passed overhead without seeing her, she might not survive. Until morning, the reindeer around her became restless, several lifting their heads toward the sky, while snow swirled violently between them. Emily forced herself onto one elbow, trying desperately to stay conscious as the buzzing sound slowly faded back into the darkness, and for one horrible moment, she believed the rescue team had missed her completely. Emily watched the darkness above the storm long after the sound of the drone disappeared, and the silence that followed felt worse than the cold, because now she knew rescue had come close enough to save her, and still failed to find her. The tiny spark of hope inside her chest faded, almost instantly replaced by the crushing realization that she might not survive the night. After all, her body slumped lower against the snow, while the reindeer remained tightly gathered around her, their thick coats covered in layers of frost, yet somehow unmoving against the endless wind. Emily tried forcing herself to stay alert, but exhaustion pulled at her harder. Every minute her thoughts drifted strangely, now jumping between memories and reality. Without warning, one second, she could hear the storm screaming outside the circle, and the next she was remembering summer mornings back home in Denver, sunlight through the kitchen window, the smell of pancakes, her father singing badly to old country songs, while her mother laughed at him. The memories felt so vivid that Emily almost smiled, until another blast of freezing air slipped through the herd and snapped her back into the Arctic darkness. She realized her hands had stopped shaking completely, which frightened her more than anything, because she knew what it meant. Her body was losing the ability to fight the cold. She tried rubbing her fingers together, but they barely responded, numb and stiff beneath her gloves. The young reindeer beside her shifted slightly, pressing closer against her shoulder, and Emily could feel steady warmth through her frozen jacket. She rested her head carefully against the animal's thick fur, too weak now to care. How impossible the situation seemed somewhere outside the protective circle. The storm intensified again. Snow whipped violently across the frozen ground, creating waves of white that swallowed everything beyond a few feet. Emily listened to the wind for a while, until another sound slowly reached her ears, faint voices. At first she thought she was hallucinating again, but then she heard them more clearly, distant human voices crackling through static over a radio. Her heart pounded weakly inside her chest. Rescue team. She opened her mouth to scream, but only a broken whisper escaped her frozen throat. Panic surged through her exhausted body because the voices sounded far away, moving somewhere beyond the storm. She forced herself forward, trying to crawl out from the herd, but the moment icy wind hit her directly, dizziness slammed into her so hard the world tilted sideways. Emily collapsed face first into the snow, struggling to breathe. Immediately, the lead reindeer stepped forward, blocking the wind again, while two others shifted closer around her, almost guiding her back into the center of the circle. Emily stared at them in disbelief through blurry, half-frozen eyes. No fear, no aggression, just silent protection. Tears rolled down her cheeks and froze instantly against her skin, because deep down she understood something that made no sense. These animals were actively trying to keep her alive. The radio voices faded again, swallowed by distance and storm, until only silence remained. Emily closed her eyes, fighting the terrifying urge to sleep, because now warmth spread through her entire body, dangerous, unnatural warmth, the kind survival experts warned about before hypothermia, shut the body down completely. Her breathing slowed, and for a moment the storm outside sounded far away. Almost peaceful, she thought about her family again. Wondering if her mother had already received the call that Emily's research convoy lost contact somewhere in Alaska. She imagined her father sitting awake all night staring at his phone, refusing to believe the worst. Emily wanted desperately to see them again, but her body felt heavier than the snow beneath her, and every breath required more effort than the last. Suddenly, the lead reindeer lifted its head, sharply, ears twitching toward the darkness. Beyond the storm, the rest of the herd reacted. Instantly, several animals turning in the same direction, completely alert. Emily forced her eyes open, trying to understand what changed. Then, faintly through the screaming wind, she heard it again, not voices this time, but the low mechanical hum of engines somewhere in the distance, closer than before, much closer. Bright lights flickered faintly through the swirling snow, and for the first time all night, Emily realized the rescue team might actually be coming back. The lights moved slowly through the storm like ghosts trapped inside the snow, and Emily stared at them with fading awareness, while the sound of engines grew louder across the frozen wilderness. Somewhere beyond the white darkness, rescuers were fighting their way back toward her, but inside the circle of reindeer, time felt strangely still. The animals remained tightly gathered around her, bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, creating a barrier against the violent Arctic wind. Emily could feel warmth trapped beneath the thick layers of fur surrounding her, and every few seconds clouds of steam drifted upward from the herd into the freezing air. Her breathing had become shallow, now slow enough that even she noticed it, and the realization terrified her. Because she understood what hypothermia was doing, her body was shutting down piece by piece. She tried forcing herself to stay awake by focusing on the lights in the distance, but her thoughts kept slipping away from her, like dreams dissolving after waking. She remembered being 8 years old, standing beside her father during a snowstorm in Colorado, while he wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and told her that cold weather always looked more frightening than it really was. Back then she believed him. Now she understood nature could be beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Another gust slammed into the outside of the herd, but the reindeer barely moved. The lead animal remained directly in front of Emily, shielding her from the strongest wind with its massive body, while smaller reindeer settled close around her legs and sides, almost as if they understood exactly where her body was losing heat. Emily slowly lifted one trembling hand and rested it against the thick neck of the nearest animal. Its fur was damp with melting snow, but beneath it she could feel steady living warmth, and for a moment she stopped feeling afraid, because somehow in the coldest place she had ever seen, she was no longer alone. Suddenly bright beams cut through the storm, stronger, now closer. Emily squinted through blurred vision and finally saw the outline of a snowcat vehicle pushing through deep drifts with flashing emergency lights glowing against the darkness. Voices echoed faintly through loudspeakers, distorted by the wind, but unmistakably human. Emily tried calling back again, but only a weak, broken sound escaped her lips. The rescue team still could not see her clearly, because the storm swallowed almost everything beyond a few yards. Then one of the rescuers shouted something, and powerful searchlights swept across the ice field, suddenly illuminating the herd. Dozens of reindeer, standing motionless in a perfect circle around a single figure in the snow. Emily saw the snowcat stop abruptly, as if the team inside could not believe what they were seeing. One rescuer stepped out, carefully fighting against the wind, while another aimed a thermal camera toward the herd. Over the radio, someone yelled, "She is alive." Emily felt tears burn against her frozen cheeks, because after hours trapped between life and death, those words sounded unreal. The rescuers moved closer, slowly, not wanting to startle the animals. But what happened next shocked everyone watching. The lead reindeer stepped forward, positioning itself between Emily and the approaching humans, lowering its massive antlers slightly, not aggressively, but protectively, as if guarding her. The rescue team froze, uncertain what to do, while snow whipped violently around them. One rescuer carefully spoke in a calm voice while extending a gloved hand. but the animal refused to move. Emily stared weakly at the reindeer, unable to understand why it stayed after every survival instinct should have driven the herd away. Finally, the young reindeer beside Emily stood up first and slowly backed away into the storm. The others followed one by one until only the lead animal remained. For several long seconds it looked directly at Emily while snow gathered across its thick coat. Then, without warning, it turned and disappeared into the blizzard after the rest of the herd. The rescuers rushed forward, immediately wrapping Emily in heated blankets. While checking her pulse, one of them kept repeating that she should not still be conscious at this temperature, but Emily barely heard him because her eyes remained fixed on the empty darkness where the animals had vanished. And just before exhaustion finally pulled her unconscious, she realized something that would haunt every expert involved in the rescue for years. The reindeer had not stayed with her because they were trapped by the storm. They had stayed because they chose to. Emily woke to the sound of steady beeping and soft voices echoing somewhere nearby, but for several long seconds, she could not understand where she was because the last thing she remembered was endless snow swirling around a circle of reindeer in the middle of the Arctic darkness. She tried opening her eyes fully, and bright white light immediately flooded her vision, forcing her to blink several times before shapes slowly became clear. Heated blankets covered her body. Machines hummed quietly beside her, and warm air filled the room with a faint smell of disinfectant and coffee. A hospital. Emily turned her head weakly, and pain shot through her stiff neck, but she barely noticed because relief crashed over her so suddenly it almost made her cry. She was alive. One of the nurses standing near the doorway noticed she was awake and quickly walked over, calling for the doctor. Emily tried speaking, but her throat felt painfully dry. All she managed was a weak whisper, asking one question. What happened? The nurse exchanged a strange look with the doctor, entering the room as if neither of them knew how to answer that properly. The doctor checked her monitors carefully before explaining that the rescue team found her nearly unconscious during the storm with severe hypothermia. Her core body temperature had dropped dangerously low, and according to the medical team, she should not have survived another hour alone in those conditions. Emily listened quietly, but her mind focused on something else. The reindeer. She asked if anyone else saw them. Again, the room went silent for a second before the doctor nodded slowly. Every member of the rescue team saw them. He admitted they were standing around you when they arrived. Emily stared at the ceiling, trying to process everything, because now that she was warm and safe, the entire experience almost felt impossible, like something her exhausted brain invented to survive, but the details remained too vivid. The warmth of thick fur against her shoulder, the clouds of steam rising into frozen air, the silent protective eyes watching the storm outside. Her thoughts were interrupted when another man entered the room, wearing a heavy winter jacket with an Arctic wildlife research patch stitched across the chest. He introduced himself as Daniel Brooks, a wildlife specialist assisting local authorities after the rescue. Emily immediately noticed the expression on his face, curiosity mixed with disbelief. He pulled a chair beside her bed and carefully explained that reindeer behavior like this had almost never been documented. Wild herds avoided humans, especially during severe storms. According to Daniel, the rescue team expected the animals to scatter the moment vehicles approached, but instead the herd stayed around Emily for hours as if guarding her position. He paused before adding something even stranger. Thermal footage from the drone showed the animals constantly rotating positions throughout the night. The larger reindeer blocked the strongest wind, while smaller ones remained close to Emily's body heat. Daniel admitted it looked intentional. Emily felt chills despite the heated room, because deep down she already knew that she remembered the lead reindeer standing in front of her when rescuers approached, refusing to leave until the very last moment. Daniel leaned forward, quietly asking if anything unusual happened before the herd surrounded her. Emily hesitated, unsure how to explain it, but eventually she described the way the animals watched her, the way they moved closer after she collapsed, and how the young reindeer pressed against her side during the coldest part of the storm. Daniel listened without interrupting, then slowly shook his head, saying he had studied Arctic wildlife for 20 years and had never heard anything remotely similar before. The story spread quickly after that. Local news stations picked it up first, then national media. Within days, Emily's rescue became one of the most talked about survival stories in the country. Headlines called it a miracle in the Arctic. Interviews flooded the hospital, while experts debated whether the animals acted out of instinct, curiosity, or something Nobody fully understood Emily avoided most of the cameras because every time reporters asked what saved her, she could only picture those silent figures standing in the storm around her, and no explanation ever felt big enough. Late one evening, after another exhausting round of interviews, Emily stood beside her hospital window, watching snow fall softly outside the city lights. And for the first time since the rescue, she allowed herself to think about how close she came to disappearing forever. Her reflection looked pale and tired in the glass, but alive. She placed a hand against the window, quietly whispering thank you into the empty room. And somewhere deep in the frozen wilderness, hundreds of miles away, the lead reindeer lifted its head toward the dark Arctic wind as if it heard her. By the second week after the rescue, Emily could finally walk without assistance, but her life no longer felt normal. Everywhere she looked, people were talking about the storm, the reindeer, and the impossible survival story. Television networks replayed thermal drone footage showing the glowing circle in the middle of the frozen wilderness, while online experts argued endlessly over what really happened. Some claimed the animals reacted instinctively to body heat, while others believed the herd displayed behavior far beyond normal wildlife patterns. Emily tried avoiding the attention, but every time she closed her eyes, she still saw the lead reindeer standing silently in the storm, watching her with those dark, steady eyes, and no scientific explanation made the memory feel less real. One cold afternoon, Daniel Brooks invited Emily to visit the wildlife research station outside Anchorage, where specialists were studying migration patterns from the same region where she had been rescued. Emily agreed, partly because she needed answers, and partly because something inside her refused to let the experience go. When she arrived, the station looked small against the endless snow-covered mountains surrounding its satellite equipment, and weather towers rose from the frozen landscape, while icy wind rattled metal fences. Daniel greeted her warmly before leading her inside, where giant digital maps covered the walls, glowing with movement data from tracked reindeer herds. Emily stared quietly at the screens as colored lines crossed hundreds of miles of Arctic terrain. Daniel explained that one particular herd had behaved strangely during the night of the storm. According to tracking collars, the animals abruptly changed direction in the middle of migration and traveled nearly 7 extra miles directly toward the area where Emily collapsed. That kind of behavior made no sense, especially during severe weather conditions when survival instincts normally forced herds to conserve energy. Emily felt a chill run through her body as Daniel zoomed in on the map, showing the exact coordinates where rescuers found her. Then he showed her something else, thermal footage from the rescue drone, clearer than anything shown publicly. Emily watched silently as glowing shapes formed a near-perfect ring around a single cold spot in the snow. Her body, even after everything she experienced, seeing it from above felt unreal. The animals rotated positions constantly, larger reindeer facing outward against the wind, while smaller ones remained closer to the center. Daniel paused the video and pointed at one large heat signature standing apart from the rest near the opening of the circle. According to rescue team reports, that animal stayed until humans physically approached. Emily swallowed hard because she already knew which reindeer he meant. Daniel admitted none of the wildlife experts at the station could fully explain the behavior. He said reindeer were intelligent social animals, but this level of coordinated protection toward a stranger was almost unheard of. Emily stared at the frozen image on the screen, while memories flooded back, the warmth trapped inside the herd, the steady breathing surrounding her during the worst night of her life. And suddenly she asked the question she had been afraid to say out loud since the rescue. Do you think they understood I was dying? Daniel remained silent for a moment before quietly answering, I think they understood you needed help. Those words stayed with Emily long after she left the research station. That evening, snow fell gently across Anchorage as she walked alone through the parking lot, wrapped tightly in her winter coat. But for the first time since the storm, she noticed something different. The fear was fading, replaced by gratitude deeper than anything she had ever felt. Then her phone vibrated in her pocket. It was a message from her mother asking when she was finally coming home for Christmas. Emily smiled softly, staring at the screen before typing back, soon, very soon. Because surviving the Arctic changed something inside her. She no longer wanted to spend every moment chasing work while ignoring the people who mattered most. Later that night, while scrolling through endless online comments about her story, Emily stopped suddenly at one message posted anonymously beneath a news article. It simply read, "Some animals remember kindness longer than humans do." Emily stared at the sentence for a long time because deep down she could not explain why, but it felt less like a comment from a stranger and more like a message meant specifically for her. Winter returned to Alaska faster than Emily expected, and even months later the story still followed her everywhere. She went, strangers recognized her, and airports reporters continued calling for interviews, and online debates about the rescue had grown even louder. Some people believed the reindeer acted through rare instinct, while others insisted the entire event had been exaggerated by the media, but none of those opinions mattered to Emily anymore, because deep down she knew exactly what she felt. That night inside the storm, she had felt protected, not by accident, not by confusion, but by something alive choosing not to leave her behind. One evening, Daniel Brooks called unexpectedly and told her the research station had tracked the same herd moving back through the region where she was rescued. He explained that weather conditions would remain stable for only a few days before another Arctic system arrived. Then, after a long silence, he asked if she wanted to go back. Emily felt her heartbeat quicken immediately. Part of her was terrified to return to the place where she almost died, but another part of her needed to see it again, needed to know the night had truly happened. 3 days later, she stood beside a snowcat under a pale gray sky, watching endless frozen wilderness stretch across the horizon. The air was brutally cold, though nowhere near as deadly as the storm months earlier. Still, the wind alone made her chest tighten with memory. Daniel handed her a heavy winter jacket and carefully explained that the herd had been spotted moving across nearby valleys according to tracking signals. Emily nodded quietly before climbing into the vehicle. As they traveled deeper into the Arctic, the landscape grew hauntingly familiar: frozen rivers, endless white hills, and silence so complete it almost felt unnatural. Emily stared out the window, remembering flashes of that terrible night, the frozen darkness, the feeling of giving up, and the impossible warmth that followed. After nearly 2 hours, Daniel slowed the vehicle near a wide open field covered in untouched snow. He pointed toward distant movement along the ridge, and Emily held her breath. A herd of reindeer emerged slowly through the white landscape, their thick coats glowing softly beneath weak winter sunlight. For several moments, Emily could not move. Emotion caught painfully in her throat, because seeing them again felt strangely overwhelming. Not fear, not excitement, something deeper: gratitude. Daniel quietly remained inside the vehicle, giving her space. While Emily stepped carefully into the snow, the cold air instantly burned her lungs, but she kept walking slowly toward the herd. The animals noticed her almost immediately. Several lifted their heads, watching silently, while snow drifted around them. Emily stopped a short distance away, unsure what to do next. Her heart pounded inside her coat, and suddenly one large reindeer stepped forward from the center of the herd, massive antlers rising above the others. Emily froze because she recognized it instantly. The same calm eyes, the same scar near the left side of its muzzle. The lead reindeer from the storm. The animal stared at her for several long seconds while the wind moved gently through its thick fur. Then slowly, unbelievably, it walked closer. Emily felt tears building in her eyes as the distance between them disappeared. She could hear its steady breathing, now see tiny crystals of frost resting across its coat. But the reindeer showed no fear, no aggression, only quiet recognition. Emily carefully removed one glove despite the cold and extended her trembling hand. The animal lowered its head slightly, stopping just close enough for her fingertips to brush the thick fur along its neck. Warmth spread instantly against her frozen skin, and for one impossible moment, Emily felt transported back into that circle beneath the storm where death had surrounded her, and somehow kindness had found her anyway. Behind her, Daniel whispered something in disbelief while lifting his camera slowly, but Emily barely heard him because the reindeer remained completely still beside her, as if the Arctic itself had paused around them. Then suddenly the herd began moving again, turning toward the endless snow-covered hills. The lead reindeer stepped back, glancing at Emily one final time before following the others into the white distance. And as she watched them disappear across the frozen wilderness, Emily realized something that would stay with her forever. Sometimes survival changes more than your life. Sometimes it changes what you believe the world is capable of. Almost a year passed after the storm, and although Emily Carter returned to her normal life on the surface, nothing inside her truly felt the same anymore. Before Alaska, she used to believe survival depended only on preparation, training, and logic, but now every time winter arrived, She remembered the impossible warmth of living bodies surrounding her in the middle of endless frozen darkness, and no matter how many scientists debated the event or how many interviews she gave, one truth never changed. She was alive because something in that wilderness refused to let her disappear. Emily eventually left the research company she had worked for during the expedition, surprising almost everyone around her. Instead of spending months chasing dangerous field assignments across remote locations, she moved back closer to her family in Colorado, where mornings felt quieter and life finally slowed down enough for her to appreciate small things. Again, coffee with her mother, late-night movies with her sister. Long conversations with her father that no longer ended with promises to call back later, because for the first time Emily understood how fragile time really was. Some nights, she still woke suddenly from dreams of violent Arctic wind and endless white storms, but those memories no longer filled her with fear now. They carried something else: gratitude. During the following winter, Daniel Brooks invited Emily to speak at a wildlife conservation event in Anchorage where researchers, conservationists, and rescue workers gathered to discuss survival stories connected to extreme environments. Emily almost declined at first because she hated public attention, but eventually she agreed, hoping she could explain what the experience taught her beyond headlines and internet theories. When she stepped onto the stage that evening, the room fell completely silent. Giant screens behind her displayed the thermal drone image from the rescue, a glowing circle in the middle of frozen darkness. Emily looked at the image for several seconds before speaking softly into the microphone. Everyone keeps asking me why the animals stayed, but maybe we are asking the wrong question. The audience remained silent, listening closely. Emily explained how helpless she felt during the storm, how close she came to giving up, and how impossible it felt to suddenly find warmth and protection in the middle of certain death. She admitted that before Alaska, she viewed nature mostly through data, weather reports, migration maps, and research papers, but after that night, she started seeing something more: connection. She told them, sometimes survival is not just about strength, sometimes it is about being reminded that you are not alone in the world, even when you think you are. Several people in the audience wiped tears from their eyes while rescue workers quietly nodded because they understood how rare survival stories like hers truly were. After the event ended, Emily stepped outside into the freezing night air. Snow drifted softly beneath the city lights, and for a moment, she simply stood there breathing slowly, while memories returned: the storm, the circle, the warmth. Then she noticed movement near the tree line beyond the parking area. At first, she assumed it was only her imagination, but the shape remained still, watching from the darkness. Emily walked forward, carefully, heart pounding harder with every step, until moonlight revealed a familiar silhouette standing silently beyond the snow-covered fence, a large reindeer with frost along its thick coat and a scar near the left side of its muzzle. Emily froze completely.